January 9th, 1861. Mississippi secedes from the Union. Oh, that's 1861. Following the lead of South Carolina 3 weeks earlier. Well, I wouldn't mind if Mississippi left now. You can go now. Get on out of here, Mississippi. Or at least the white supremacists. Alabama, Mississippi, all the white supremacists. You all could secede from the Union. I am A-OK with you all not being Americans, because you're not Americans. You are not Americans. January 9th. Don't they still have the Confederate flag inside their state flag? Is it Mississippi or Alabama? January 9th, 1861. Mississippi secedes from the Union. Hot diggity dog. Hot diggity dog. January 9th, man. If I was Lincoln, I'd been like, you know what? That's actually a good thing. We might need Virginia, but Mississippi, I don't know about all that. I'm just going to read a page here. I just like that. I think they're like against Lincoln, but just the fact that they're talking about Lincoln and writing a book tells me that they have no idea about the neo-Confederates of Kentucky today. We're going to talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Let's get that pulled up. Kansas-Nebraska Act. And I know you already know what it is, but I need to have a refresher. It's a territorial organic act that created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. It was drafted by Democratic Senator Stephen A. Douglas, passed by the 33rd United States Congress, and signed into law by President Franklin Pierce. Okay, so 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act is good law, and it's 54, so it's probably a precursor, right? Is this one of the reasons for the Civil War? Or was this to help they had all those fucking compromises right beforehand. Well, that's being pulled up. Let's go ahead and read. Lincoln was prepared to put up with the existence of slavery in the South and to grant a stringent fugitive slave law, but he would not tolerate the extension of slavery into the territories. You know, his first inauguration was such a huge olive branch. If those Confederate stupid dumb fucks, if they're being pragmatic, if they're like, man, there's no way we could separate from America and then fight America, we won't be able to do that. We won't be able to. No, that doesn't make any sense. Lincoln says he wants the Union to stay strong. So if they would have stayed in the Union, then we wouldn't have had the Civil War and then the Emancipation Proclamation. Then slavery wouldn't have been gotten rid of. That would have been terrible for mankind. But I'm thinking just, from a Confederate fucking Mississippi's perspective, right? Why secede? Abraham Lincoln said you get to keep your fucking slaves, you slave-owning fucking piles of shit. He says you get to keep your slaves. He says that even if your slaves run away from Mississippi, that the fucking North, even though he disagrees with the shit, he disagrees with the institution, disagrees with the fugitive slave law, but he'll enforce it because basically he believes you have pros and cons. And the Union was a greater good than some of the members of the Union having slaves. So overall, he thought that the Union was a greater good than. And then he also didn't tolerate the extension of slavery into the new territories. So ultimately, it's like, okay, you all got your laws and we got to respect your laws. But when it comes to brand new territories, I don't think so. I don't think we should extend slavery into the territories. But against his position, one argument was directed. So that's basically Lincoln gave fucking the South, the Confederate fucking slave-owning racist sons of bitches, everything they wanted. Who gives it? Why would Mississippi give a shit about Kansas or fucking Wisconsin or California? You got your shit going on fucking Mississippi? You just want to export your shit, your fucking racist criminality, fucking perversion all over the world, you sick fuck. But against Lincoln's position, one argument was directed to which he had to find an answer. Suppose he was asked that the South refuses to remain in the Union if it's not allowed some possibility of extending slavery into the territories. What would you say then? Is not the Kansas-Nebraska Act a great measure for saving the Union by satisfying the South? Do you prefer to keep slavery out of the territories and break the Union rather than to admit slavery and save the Union? Which do you choose, the extension of slavery or the breaking of the Union? To this, Lincoln answered that if these are really the alternatives which the Kansas-Nebraska Act held out, he would choose the extension of slavery and the maintenance of the Union, much As I hate slavery, I would consent to the extension of it rather than to see the Union dissolved, just as I would consent to any great evil to avoid a greater evil. So he's saying, he's like, okay, Mississippi, have your slaves and, have your cake and eat it too. Have your fugitive slave law, have your slaves. End of story. His inauguration, he says that he's not going to get rid. He don't think he was legally allowed to get rid of slavery, and he wasn't inclined to do so. So he wasn't an abolitionist. He was a unionist. He didn't begin as an abolitionist. 1863, so it took 2 years of Civil War before he enacted the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was just a military measure. So it wasn't like he just did it out of the goodness of his heart. And it is actually a fucking mess that you go to the Mississippi and you liberate people and you have all these black folks. All you have to do is put a gun in their hand and they'd be ready to fight for themselves. But instead, it's just chaos. They're running around all over the place and they weren't allowed to join the Union ranks. And so it was like, okay, you're free. Free to do what? Free to go over there and sit in that tree and hope that nobody harms me. Is that what I'm free to do? So it actually was kind of common sense. You go there, Mississippi, you fight in the Confederates, free the slaves, put a gun in his hand so that way he could free himself. It's common sense, Emancipation Proclamation. And that's also, he only freed those slaves in the rebellion nations. Even there's like parishes, there's like counties in Louisiana that's like, all of Louisiana, you gotta free your slaves, except for these 5 counties. This was a startling answer. It's a sentence to remember. It guides Lincoln's thought. It's the saving of the American Union, which is always uppermost in Lincoln's thought and policy. But in this case, he goes on quickly to complete the answer. He says he doesn't believe that these are the alternatives which are presented. It is not true to claim that the extension of slavery by such measures as the Kansas-Nebraska Act will save the Union. So, Territorial Organic Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. Stephen Douglas. He introduced a bill intended to open up new lands to develop and facilitate the construction of a transcontinental railroad. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act is most notable for effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise, stoking national tensions over slavery and contributing to a series of armed conflicts known as Bleeding Kansas. Oh, great. So Kansas, Nebraska, that's what the Confederates wanted. So we had a Missouri Compromise, but then they fucking did Kansas-Nebraska Act so they can, extend slavery into the states. And now you got a bunch of people killing each other in Kansas. Fucking smart. Great, Stephen A. Douglas. Good call by you, not you dumb motherfucker. Such measures may persuade the South that it is worthwhile to remain in the Union, but will they not also go far to persuade the North that it is becoming fast a Union in which it is not worthwhile to remain? When I go to Union saving, says Abraham Lincoln, I must believe at least that the means I employ have some adaptation to the end. To my mind, Nebraska has no such adaptation. It is an aggravation, rather, of the only one thing which ever endangers the Union. So Lincoln here had touched upon the heart of the problem, whether the Union could survive half slave and half free. Some in the South had claimed that the extension of slavery was necessary if they were to remain in the Union. Some in the North asserted that if slavery was extended, then they would leave the Union. These extreme positions were coming to be occupied. Lincoln wrote to a friend at this time, our political problem now is, can we as a nation continue together permanently, forever, half slave and half free? The problem is too mighty for me. May God in his mercy superintend the solution. Here was his first expression of the startling declaration that was to come about 3 years later. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act had roused Lincoln. He became in his state the leader of the Whigs in their attack upon Douglas and his doctrines. In 1855, Douglas's colleague from Illinois in the United States Senate, James Shields, reached the end of his term of office. Lincoln came forward as a Whig candidate, and when he saw that he could not obtain a majority, he advised his Whig followers to support Lyman Trumbull. An anti-Nebraska Democrat, Trumbull was elected and took his place with Douglas. Though opposed to him as a senator from Illinois, Lincoln was keenly disappointed at his defeat. Indeed, after having been elected in 1854 to the Illinois state legislature, he had resigned soon after in order to be elected as senator. So, da-da-da-da-da, Kansas, Nebraska, what the fuck? And that's, January January 9th. That's January 9th. You know who's going to secede tomorrow? Fuck up Florida. My God, this just, America keeps getting better and better. Abraham Lincoln, what are you doing? Just keep Maine, New York, Colorado, California. Well, why we? No reason to fret. What, Mississippi? Oh no, not Mississippi. Florida left the Union. Oh no, not Florida.